Hi, I'm Josh Harris. I've just been selected for the Australian Marathon team for the World Championships, and you're listening to the Physical Performance Show.
And the winner is...
Failure is not an option.
I've had my ups and my downs.
Phelps with 10 meters left. 3 minutes too good. The crowd roaring. 3 minutes down.
I think it's an absolutely breakthrough experience.
Welcome to the Physical Performance Show, the show designed to inspire the pursuit of your physical best performance. I'm your host, Brad Beer. Listen in as we delve into how the world's top physical performers achieve their success, as well as the highs, the lows, and the journey of getting there. Let's get ready, set, let's go. Listeners, welcome to another episode of the Physical Performance Show. I trust you've been having a great week and that you've also been out there pursuing your physical best and achieving some great gains along the way. I hope also that you've been inspired by previous guests of the Physical Performance Show, including last week's guest, Mr. Spencer Smith, one of triathlon's Hall of Famers and all-time great athletes, who, as I said at the top end of last week's episode, Spencer won half of all the professional races he ever went in as a professional triathlete. Just a remarkable statistic from one of the sport of triathlon's true characters. This week we have a great guest in store. More on this week's guest, Mr. Josh Harris, in just a moment. Today's show is lovingly brought to you, as always, by POGO Physio. We exist to help you perform at your physical best, and we do this through Australia's first fixed-fee, unlimited access finish line programs. They're 2, 6, and 12 weeks in duration, and the beauty is that we've developed them to help you get the treatment that you can truly benefit from, as opposed to the treatment that you can afford on a session-to-session basis. And the outcomes are worlds apart. You can accelerate rehabilitation or truly get on top of a condition that's plagued you or persisted for a long time through these unique ways of offering the service. So no more pain each time you come in and out the door. One fee covers a lot. And what we love about the finish line programs is that our clients who graduate from the programs get on average 30 to 40% more in value from the services than what they do pay through their fee. And we love that, because for us it's all about getting each and every person that walks through the doors of POGO Physio across their physio finish line. And what's that? Well, it's simple. It's the end of rehabilitation. We don't want you to come back. We want to give you a high five, tell you that we love you, but unless it's for maintenance or performance optimization, the job's done. So no more of hearing at a barbecue that physios don't work or that they just want patients to keep coming back. With our physio finish line programs, it gives you certainty of spend and certainty of time around outcome. So if you'd like more information around the finish line programs, be sure to jump over to pogophysio.com.au, and there you can read all about our model and also about our Discover Recover sessions, which are our initial appointments. And listeners, we insist that our initial appointments are 1 hour in duration, because we believe in an accurate diagnosis being the best gift we can give you, the consumer of our service. If you're in a state, good news, POGO Partners will be launching through other states in Australia the back half of 2017. So stay tuned if you'd like to access the finish line programs, but you just don't have them at your fingertips at the moment. A massive thank you to you, the listener, who this may be your first time or it may be your 64th time. If you're somewhere in between, massive thank you also. But for you, the faithful listener, thank you for your attention and feedback. The feedback that we get also always makes the world of difference. It's just terrific. And a massive thank you to you, the listener, who have been leaving reviews on iTunes. Reviews on iTunes just help the program get more visible, if you like, inside of iTunes. And that's just a terrific outcome. Big thanks this week to Nu Bowker. And Nu has rated the program 5 stars. And Nu comments, Thanks, Brad, for such an inspiring and informative podcast. The company of you and your hosts are fuel for my long runs and much appreciated. I love that through your interviews, we are able to relate to these athletes. Your friendly and respectful line of questioning showcases that these elite athletes are real people with their own fears, their individual quirks, their own history of failure, success, disappointment, hardship, and mantras. A great reminder they are human, just like the rest of us who are further down the performance chain trying to get the best out of ourselves. Their insights are so valuable, yet I also find myself giggling aloud at some of the funny stories they have to share. Such a great balance, keep them coming. New Bowker, massive thank you for the review, particularly for taking the time. That means an enormous amount, so thank you. And I do love hearing from listeners, particularly around the long runs. It seems to be a common theme and a common thread. And if you did miss a few previous episodes, obviously I mentioned Spencer Smith at the top of the show, but pre-Spencer we also featured the Physical Performance Show's first expert, and that was Dr. Peter Malliaris, tendon specialist physiotherapist out of Melbourne, Australia, speaking about the practical tips that we need to know in order to beat persistent tendon pain, be that Achilles tendon, patella tendon, or proximal hamstring tendon. And one of the things that many listeners have commented on from Peter's sharings are that with a running injury, you don't always need to stop. Sometimes reducing load, but continuing to run is a better thing to do than complete abstinence. So be sure to jump back over if that piques your interest and check out episode 62 with Dr. Peter Malliaris and all of his great sharings. So listeners, this week's guest is Mr. Josh Harris. Josh Harris is an Australian marathoner on the rise. Josh recently was named in the Australian team for the World IAAF Athletics Championships to be held in London, and Josh takes us through the journey of qualifying for his first Australian Open marathon team. Josh also shares around the pros and cons, if you like, of his current self-coaching for his own performance. Josh shares around the years that he had with his coach in the early days ahead of his coach's passing. Josh also shares around setting the Australian records in the 25,000 and 30,000 metres on a track for Australia. Touches on some beer miling and his credentials there. And Josh also shares there's some really great, and I know you're going to really get a lot out of this, listeners, just great practical tips and insights onto how to get the most out of your training, particularly if you're preparing for a marathon, be it your first or your 51st. You're going to really enjoy Josh Harris. He's just a good, authentic Aussie bloke who's making the most of what he's got, and what he's got is certainly a whole lot of potential. So this is a runner I know we're going to see a lot more from. At the time of this show going live, Josh will be just a matter of days away from taking to the start line in the Gold Coast Airport Marathon half marathon. So if you are on the Gold Coast the first weekend in July 2017, if you see Josh Harris, be sure to say hi, let him know you've had a listen, and maybe even tell him something that you've taken away from his sharings on this episode. So guys, let's jump straight in with Mr. Josh Harris. Listeners, it's a real treat to be catching up today with Josh Harris. Josh is an Australian up-and-coming running distance star who, as per Josh's bio, has just secured a berth on the Australian marathon team for the upcoming IAAF World Championships, Athletics Championships. And Josh's story, guys, is going to really interest you in terms of where Josh has come from, how he's getting to where he wants to go, and a whole lot more. So Josh Harris, welcome along.
Thanks for having me.
So mate, let's start with something a little bit fun and curly. What's one thing that scares Josh Harris?
Oh, gee, I'd probably have to say snakes. Anytime summer comes around and the temperatures start to get warm, I start to fear going out on a long run on my own and getting in an encounter with some snakes. So, that would have to be one thing that scares me.
And hailing from Tassie, when was the last time, lots of snakes? I always think of Cradle Mountain and the black snakes, isn't it? But when was the last time you came across a reptile on your run?
Probably when I went up to Falls Creek this year. There were probably 3 in my 4-week stay, so I guess that's not too bad. But Yeah, I usually do see a couple every summer in Tassie.
And what sort are they? For overseas listeners, this will definitely help tourism.
To be honest, I'm not exactly sure. I'm that scared of them that any snake's harmful to me.
Oh, I think it's funny, isn't it? I'm like you, Josh, and I see one, I want to get away as quick as I can. But, I mean, for overseas listeners, yes, we do have a lot of snakes in Australia. And it's just ironic, isn't it, Josh? I mean, you've run all around the world that when we go out, we do have to be mindful of not treading on something that's potentially dangerous.
Definitely. And I heard Mona's interview and he loves the snakes. So, yeah, I wish I was like him.
Well, a little bit like Dean Canazis, the ultra marathon man, Josh, who was a recent guest on the show, and Dean said in the Spartathlon he was running past snakes as thick as park benches in the Greek hills. So, mate, you can keep that. So, Josh, let's start, mate. To date in your running career, we want to really pull it apart. What's the top achievement or accomplishment that you'd rate as the most outstanding for you to date? Obviously, your best is still ahead, but to date, what's the one that's the most satisfying for you?
Oh, it definitely has to be my selection for the World Championships this year. I've been working really, really hard since I started athletics in the year 2000. It's been a gradual build, and I guess the successes have started to come, and to get the recognition to finally make an Australian team at the top level is something that, I'm looking so forward to.
And how many weeks until you race, Josh? We're recording this June.
Yep, so it's 8.5 weeks from today, the race.
So 8.5 weeks, so you really are in the final preparation phase, right?
Yeah, I'm really starting to get into some high mileage again now, and this next 6 or 7 weeks is really important.
And we want to unpack some of that preparation and the work that was required to get you that berth in the first place, Josh. But just on the race itself, can you take us, myself and the listeners, Josh, through how your qualifying race played out? You mean you had to run, correct me if I'm wrong, a sub, was it 2:19 or sub 2?
Yep.
Sub 2:19 to qualify, and you ended up running 2:17. Correct me if I'm wrong. Yep. So how did that race play out? Where was it? And take us through the journey.
Yeah, so I went to Lake Biwa in Japan in March, and it was going to be my last attempt to qualify. My best time going in was 2 hours 20. So I managed to take 3 minutes 20 off my best, which was a massive breakthrough. Things just felt really good the whole way. I focused on a lot of those process type things, and the splits just took care of themselves. And I got to the 30k mark, and I knew that I was going to go well under the qualifying time, providing I didn't get any cramps or anything kind of unexpected like that. So it was a great day, and I was able to celebrate kind of the last 5Ks because I just knew that I was going to do it. And luckily enough, because you've got to be top 3 to actually make the team, I was 3rd fastest of the nominated athletes, so I've got my spot on the team.
And mate, congratulations. I mean, it's a great achievement. You're young in years. I mean, what's your age at the moment, Josh?
26 at the moment. Which,
in terms of an international marathon career, is young, right?
Yeah, definitely. There's a couple of 26 to 27-year-olds in Australia that are now at my level. So Brad, who will be on the team with me, and then Jack Colreevy, who just missed out, are about my level, but we're pretty much the youngest going round at the moment.
Yeah, absolutely. And Josh, you mentioned there some process things. You said this marathon PB 2:17:04 or 2:17:08. 8, sorry. You'd take those few seconds shaved off though, wouldn't you? Josh, what were the process things that went right?
I think it was just focusing on my form, so staying relaxed, focusing on sitting in behind a couple of the guys that I was running with to kind of save energy. And I guess if I compare that to a bad run that I had 12 months ago where I tried to run the Olympic time, I was probably more focused on just time, and that used a lot of mental energy in hindsight. And so I think I learnt a lot and was able to implement that in Lake Biwa this year.
And at any point during the Lake Biwa, PB run, the qualifier, did you doubt that you were going to miss it?
you never know early on in the marathon. So I guess it was just about just staying as relaxed as possible. I went through the halfway mark, probably not feeling too different to what I normally would, but there was just a massive difference between the 20 and 30K mark in terms of both how I felt and the pace being a lot quicker. And so that's kind of when I knew that things were going well.
Yeah, and I mean, you've compared, you write well on your blog, and I will tag this up for listeners to, follow your journey on. I enjoyed reading your Berlin 2016 race report, and I'm just going to read a snippet out of it here, Josh, for listeners. This is a day that, wasn't going quite to that sub 220 plan that you had. I mean, you write here, compared to Fukuoka, Japan, this part of the race didn't hurt quite as much. And you go on to say, you went through 40K in 2 hours, 13 minutes. And as you do, you allowed a worst case scenario of 8 minutes to cover the last 2.2Ks. And I like this bit. I was getting closer and closer to Kabidi and the cheers from the thousands of spectators lining the streets. In a sense, I felt like a hero, and imagine I was taking down the race leader in the last minutes of the race. But I also felt like a douchebag coming past a woman when I devote my life to this stuff, knowing the elite men were well and truly finished. So, mate, must have been a different feeling when you crossed in Lake Biwa for the 2:17.
Yeah, it was. That Berlin feeling was so cool, though, just because everyone in the crowd was cheering for the lead female, and I was kind of there, but having taken that 3 minutes off and knowing that I was about to accomplish something pretty big, although the crowd support probably wasn't as big as it was in that Berlin moment, kind of internally the emotions that I was going through were, really, really kind of unlike anything else that I've had before. Yeah,
and what was your first thought when you went across the line?
Because we had to run a lap and a half of the track, I started tearing up quite a bit in that last 600 metres, and it was just kind of a realisation that, I've kind of done what I want to do here, and I've reached a pretty lofty goal that I've set myself, and, now I've got to reevaluate those goals, but, it was an amazing feeling.
And have you, I think I cry at the end of every marathon. I think it's just that almost like a emotional, I think it's part the exertion, part the build-up, everything. It's just kind of that moment just gets you. Have you cried at the previous marathon attempts, Josh?
Nah, not at all. This was a big outburst of emotion. Kind of left it all on the track.
So that means I'm just a wuss. I'm joking, Josh. Mate, let's go through your running origin story. So, grew up in, I believe, Launceston, Tassie. One of the many great Tasmanian sporting talents. Geez, it punches its weight on the international stage. Richie Port, for example, and, many others. But how did you get into running, Josh? Two things. How did you get into it? And at what point did you realise that you had some really great running talent?
So I started in the year 2000. And I don't think it was necessarily due to the Olympics, but it was around that time. And as soon as I did my first ever race, I was just hooked and obsessed. There was never any of that kind of parental pressure. It was all me. Like I fell in love with it instantly, and I've had that kind of internal motivation ever since, which has probably got me to where I am today. And I kind of just plodded along. I snuck into the little athletics state team when I was 12 or 13, but, I was kind of at the back at nationals, and then kind of just gradually kept going up. Had a little bit of success in the steeplechase as a junior, so that tends to be a slightly easier event. So I was able to get a couple of medals at the national level there. And then I guess since I've been a senior athlete, I've just gradually improved my best times and found that I've been more competitive over the longer distances, and that I can also handle a pretty high mileage in my training, which a lot of people can't, which obviously favours being a long-distance marathon type guy.
Was there a moment, Josh, in your formative years there where you had a result and you thought, wow, I've got a long way to go in terms of developing my potential? Because, as you know, you've seen lots of, I'm sure, your junior fellow runners and competitors who haven't transitioned over into senior running. So what was it that kept you at it to transition over and keep pursuing it, now late into your 20s?
Yeah, I think it's just always been that internal motivation to want to get the best out of myself. And, being realistic, it's probably only been the last 18 months where I've believed that making a championship team is probably realistic. Since I was about 16 or 17, I set that goal when I was at a national underage development camp. But at that point, it was just a bit of writing on a piece of paper. So, I've just been kind of sticking at it, improving my best times year after year. And, I had a couple of breakthrough runs, probably about 2014, had a good half marathon on the Gold Coast. Then I made the World University Games team. So it has been really gradual. I've pretty much made step after step, and it's been a long process, but compared to some of the probably the more talented guys, I'd say. But, I've stuck at it, and I'm where I am today. And
so you've seen some of your talented running competitors fall to the wayside, have you, Josh, and go in different directions and walk away from it?
Absolutely. There are so many people out there that I would say have more talent than me that have just thrown it in. They get to that age where other things take priority. But for me, running's always been my priority, and I've kind of made that my number one. And I guess I've been able to have some decent success with it.
Yeah, absolutely. And was there any voices, or were there any voices that were encouraging you along the way, even if it's in the present day? I mean, obviously you've been on that trajectory of improvement, which is, exciting and motivating. But other than you wanting to get the best out of yourself, as you just mentioned there, Josh, is there anyone that's in your corner that's regularly cheering you on to bigger and better things, coach or otherwise?
Yeah, absolutely. My late coach, who passed away a couple of years ago, he'd be amazingly proud. I've been running with him from about 2004 for about 10 years, so he'd be very proud. And a lot of probably my mindset is due to some of the things that he instilled in me. And also, I've got a great family. My mum is so supportive. Lets a 26-year-old just cruise around at home to save money to chase the dreams. And, I've always had good friends and support networks in that sense that kind of keep me motivated.
Mate, everyone needs a support network, and big shout out to Mrs. Harris, what a champion. There's always the championship team behind the championship athlete. Mate, you mentioned there your late coach who passed away several years ago there, that he'd instilled some things in you that mindset wise that you still benefit from. Can you give us any examples there, Josh? Give myself and the listeners any examples of any of those mindset things that were instilled from your former coach, your late coach?
Yeah, he was just hard in terms of his mindset. I think he made me a pretty tough and determined athlete. He made me kind of see that in terms of training, there aren't too many boundaries. And so I guess people probably know me as someone that's, a pretty hardcore trainer, and I'd say that that's because of some of the stuff that we did with him back in the younger days. That's probably the main one.
Any examples of what you did in the younger days that gave you that, that appetite for hard work?
I just remember a couple of training sessions we did down in the Tassie winter. I think I was probably about 16 or 17, and we did a session of 3 sets of 3 1-mile reps. So, it was about 9 miles, which is about 14.4 Ks worth of intervals, which at that age is, it's pretty solid. It's pretty solid for most people training at their peak. But just things like that, they weren't at a super hard pace, but just getting that volume on the legs kind of made me realise that, your limits are what you think, because the body's an amazing thing in how it can adapt to the training that you give it.
Yeah, absolutely. It's fascinating, isn't it? It never ceases to amaze me, Josh, how on the start line of any Olympic final or World Championship race, there's, the physicality's there, but where's the psychology at? So, Josh, and your late coach's passing, was that unexpected, or was that something that everyone was preparing for?
Yeah, so he had a battle with cancer since I was probably about 16 or 17. So, as the years went on, his role became more of kind of a guidance / mentor, and then I guess at the same time I was kind of learning my craft a little bit, doing exercise science degrees, and getting pretty heavily into reading about running, and also gaining experience day to day just from my running. So kind of I started to take over the role of my programming and stuff like that as time went on. It was expected, but it was very hard when it happened.
Are you coached at the moment, Josh, or are you coaching yourself?
Yes, I've been self-coached for quite a while, yeah. Yeah,
and did you finish that exercise science degree you mentioned there?
Yeah, I finished the exercise science degree, but in terms of job prospects, there weren't too many down in Tassie, so I went back and did a Masters of Teaching, so I'm now a casual teacher and go in a couple of days a week when needed.
So you're not just on the couch at home recovering between sessions with mum, as you said.
Some day I am, but I'll do a couple of days' work.
It depends on the day, mate, after a long run. Josh, you mentioned there just something before we move on to some other things. You mentioned that as a junior, you wrote down at a camp maybe 10 years ago, one of the goals being to make an Australian senior championship team. Have you still got that bit of paper?
I don't have the bit of paper, but I remember doing it. I remember sitting in a room at an Athletics Australia camp, and I may have just wrote that down because I was sitting in a room with guys like Ryan Gregson and co that probably realistically had that dream for a couple of years. But it's paid off, and I've stuck at it, and I'm about to represent Australia at the Worlds.
So you went through with people like Ryan Gregson, who, for listeners, has been a previous guest around episode 30, the episodes in the 30s of the program, and you went through with some clearly talented, gifted athletes. Did you feel like you belonged in that sort of, or did you feel like you're a bit of a later developer and it was a bit more of a dream for you than someone like, say, a Ryan Gregson?
Yeah, so I was in a pretty tough year with Ryan Gregson. There were many guys from that age that have won national championships, a couple that don't run anymore but could have been to that level. So in terms of the flat events, I mentioned earlier I had some success with the steeplechase.
Yep.
So I probably steered clear slightly from those flat events just because of the quality, like Ryan Gregson going around there. So a bit of a later developer in that sense, but I think it's all been a pretty gradual progression, and it's been gradual progression of training as well. Like I wasn't probably running as much as those guys were at that younger age. My mileage has probably been really kind of gradually built, probably thanks to my coach in the early stages, and I think that's probably one of the reasons why I haven't had too many injuries.
Yeah, okay. Well, we definitely want to go there as part of your current prep for the World Championships. But just lastly, on the growing up side of things, the genesis story of Josh Harris, was there anyone that you admired from an athletics point of view growing up that you really wanted to emulate their feats as a child? Yeah,
not specifically. I liked a couple of steeplechasers that were going around at the time, but no one super world famous. And then some of the guys my age, I thought, these guys are really, really hardworking. This is what you've got to kind of do to be a pretty good athlete. So, it might be guys like Ryan, but, it's a long time ago now, so I can't remember exactly.
Yeah, no, but there was no one specifically. So, and were you from a sporty family, Josh? Like, has running been in your family, siblings, or?
No, not at all. It's quite funny. They all say, "Where did you get your talent from?" And I'm not too sure, to be honest. I reckon Dad would claim it's from him, but yeah, I've got his build at least. So I don't know.
So kudos to Mr. Harris, eh? Yeah. Every parent needs to lay claim on their child's talents. That's just the way it works. Josh, let's talk about, you mentioned there a few interesting things. You're self-coached. You've been gradually building up your mileage over time. Can we start with, 8.5 weeks out from your first Australian Open team representation for a major championship, that is? What's your current, you said you're about to hit some solid mileage. Can you bring listeners into the perspective of, what this next, say, 4 weeks will look like for you, and let's sort of do the conceptual stuff, but then also break it down into a bit of the nitty-gritty.
Yeah, so at the moment, I'll probably hit about 215 kilometres this week. And then I've got a couple of races coming up, so they'll be slightly less. But any week without a race, I'm looking right now to be between 215 and then up anywhere towards 240 Ks for those weeks. And in terms of those weeks, there'll be probably 2 hard sessions, possibly a third depending on the structure of the week. And then there'll also be 2 long runs. So just this week as an example, I went out and I did 2 hours 40 this morning. So that's my main long run for the week. I covered 39K. I'll do another 2 hours or 2 hours 10 on Saturday or Sunday. And then I did a speed session yesterday on the Tuesday. And then Friday will be more marathon specific work, where I'll probably knock out 80 to 90 minutes at about marathon pace, which is something that not all marathoners do, but something that I found really helps me. The other 3 days, just get out on the legs for a bit of time, jog around, but, they're kind of the easier days.
And Josh, I've read there that you've commented that you like to spend a fair bit of your training time at marathon pace. I mean, just practically for listeners' sake, your marathon pace, you're going to be holding, what,
3:15s?
Yep, so 3:15s. So, there's some serious pace in that. What percentage of this next month will be spent around that 3:15s of your total mileage?
The numbers are higher than most Australians. I know that. It would be between 10 and 20%. I'd say it's probably marathon pace would probably take up about 10%, but then there's still probably 10% of work that's fast.
Yep.
So, some of your more traditional speedier sessions, I do incorporate those, but I do like to do something weekly at this point. Just as an example, that 90-minute tempo at marathon pace or thereabouts.
And I like what you said. You figured out that you felt like you needed more than others. What were the sort of stepping stones that allowed you to figure it out and go, maybe you are a runner that responds better to a bit more quality work? Were there any sort of steps that you took?
So there's as someone that's self-coached, you got to be pretty reflective. And my first marathon was a lot worse than what I'd hoped, and I didn't really do any of that stuff. So kind of took that as one of the learnings from that and then gave it a go. But one thing that really sticks out to me is when I came back from a trip to America in December, I hadn't done any marathon pace work, and I was getting to within 10 weeks of my marathon, and I couldn't run marathon pace for more than 40 minutes. And that's kind of when I knew that I'm the kind of person that I really need that stuff at pace to respond and to be able to condition my legs for it at race day, because there are guys that are, I don't know if it's genetics, talent, what it is, but there are guys that don't need to do it. But, I've found through a few of those things that I certainly respond to it.
And, I mean, isn't that the beauty of the thrill of the chase of physical performance in figuring out what you do and don't respond to? You mentioned some traditional speed sessions, Josh. Can you share a few examples of some of the speed work you'll be incorporating in these next few weeks?
Yeah, I like to do a couple of sessions. One is it's a 26-minute session where you go 3 minutes hard, 1 minute float, 2 minutes hard, 1 minute float, 1 minute hard, 1 minute float, and then you repeat that 3 times. That's one that I really, really like to do. And then I'll occasionally throw in one of the more traditional sessions, like a quarters, for instance, but not too often. So there are a couple of the sessions that I do, but as I said, at the moment I'm hitting one of those long sessions and then 1 to 2 kind of shorter ones a week.
Yeah, mate, certainly. And with your taper, what will you be looking to do leading into the World Champs?
Yeah, so that's one thing that I found before my breakthrough run. It's obviously, as we said, it's an individual thing, and I've in the past done a more traditional taper, but I left it pretty late this time, and my week before the marathon was still 200 Ks, and for most people that's pretty big, but I responded so well to that, and so I'm going to take a similar approach. So I'll start to shut it down about a week before the race, rather than the typical 2 or 3 that most people tend to use.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? I mean, I'm in nowhere near your category of runner, Josh, but I know for myself, with my old even triathlon junior days, I seemed to always respond best when I sort of did the work pretty close to the event. So, there's no right or wrong. It's just, as you say, a process of self-discovery, isn't there? So
that's it, yeah. And I found for the shorter races, I can run really well with no taper or a day or 2 taper. So, I'm probably that kind of guy that can handle the work and also kind of loses it fairly quickly. So I kind of need to keep running for fairly close to the race. And
that last week, so you'll sort of go right up to the week out. What might that last week look like for you, Josh? The week before the race?
Yeah, I'll probably do a session on the Monday and the Wednesday. So the race is on the Sunday. A session on the Monday and the Wednesday. The Monday will be something at about race pace, maybe like 2 5K reps. So 5K at marathon pace doesn't stress you too much, or me anyway. The Wednesday will probably be a 20-minute session. Again, a lot of stuff at marathon pace, maybe a minute harder somewhere in there just to tick the legs over. But apart from that, the Tuesday, the Thursday, the Saturday will be nice and easy. And then on the Friday, it's nice and easy, but I don't mind doing like a 5-minute surge at race pace just to keep the legs ticking over as well. And
then and when you're not training that final week, are you pretty diligent with getting off your legs, Josh?
Yeah. I like to recover, and I'm someone that likes to play PlayStation rather than watch movies, but that's kind of what I tend to go towards when I'm recovering. Yeah,
everyone's different, aren't they?
Yep.
Josh, just on the coaching side of things, you said you're self-coached, you've got a background in exercise science, so you've got some smarts around physiology and training, etc. What would you say are the positives of being self-coached and the negatives? If you had to sort of do a ledger of positives and negatives in your experience, what would you say, Josh?
I think positives are, especially being in a smaller place like Tassie, that you can be really flexible in terms of your structuring, and you can listen to your body. Okay, you don't need to do a session Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday, for example. You can do what works for you and what works with what else you've got in life. I also think a positive of it is that I spend a lot of time on myself, on my program, and I'm sure there are coaches out there that do it, but I've just got that full trust in myself because of the amount of hours that I've spent working out what I want to do. Negatives, obviously, I'd say one is when you're self-coached, you've got to have a balance between self-belief and reality, because if a lot of coaches can instill that belief in you. But if I said to myself, I want to go out and run 2:10 for the marathon, it's probably not realistic. So I've got to go into some of these races kind of thinking, okay, what's realistic here? So, there's probably some of that belief stuff that I could benefit from having someone there day to day kind of giving me that. But yeah, and I guess another negative is probably the lack of group environment down here, but being a marathoner, doing as many Ks as I am, regardless, there's probably nowhere in Australia that I'd have a group around me every run anyway.
Yeah, I mean, it's as you've mentioned, it's a process of self-discovery, even with a coach, right? It's just a different combination, and clearly, Josh, you're getting some things right. So
yeah,
so great stuff, mate. Don't change things.
Yes.
Josh, in terms of a couple of interesting stats about you before we throw over a performance round. You've got a bit of a penchant for the beer mile.
Yeah.
You're quite a high performing beer miler.
Yep.
In fact, Run for Your Life magazine here in Australia features a few of your top tips. What's your interest in the beer mile, and what are your tips for listeners that want to have a go at this event?
Yeah, so when I was a 20-year-old kid, I wasn't too much different to many of the others in terms of performance, but I was able to kind of get myself a bit of marketability because I was able to do the beer mile, and it kind of progressed to the level where I was the best in the world for a couple of years, and I'm still the Australian record holder all these years later. And they're a good crew, the beer milers, and I went to the World Championships last year, but now I'm at the point where I've got to prioritise the running first. So I'll still do one if it works out with my schedule and it's not too close to a big goal race. Definitely been something that's been a bit of fun over the years.
So I've got to go a bit deeper here, Josh. For the uninitiated to the beer mile,
yep.
I've never done one myself. In fact, I had an invitation to do one not too long ago, but my schedule wouldn't allow. And despite the fact, Josh, that my surname's Beer, I don't drink beer. I've got nothing against it. It's not part of my routine. So it wouldn't have gone very well even if I had rocked up for the beer mile here on the Gold Coast. But, mate, for the uninitiated, what's the beer mile involve?
So you got to drink a beer, run a 400 metre around the track, drink a beer, run a lap, drink a beer, run a lap, drink a beer, run a lap. So by the end of it, you've had 4 beers and you've done a mile.
And is there any requirements on the sort of beer it is or the size of the beer?
Yeah, they need to be minimum 355 ml and 5%. So there aren't too many options in Australia for it.
And what would you say is your best leg of the beer mile? Is it the getting the beverage down the trap, or is it the 400 metres that follows?
Well, compared to the world record now, the only thing that lets me down is my running. He's an elite 800 metre runner, so he's just got that extra speed than me. So in terms of drinking the beers, I'm no slower than any of the elite beer milers. But I'll probably, because I'm a smaller guy than most of those guys, I'm also not quite able to run at peak mile pace for the race. I need to kind of just relax and conserve a little bit, whereas some of those guys are able to just hammer out their mile pace with the beers inside.
What sort of split would you be coming through the 400s in for the Australian record?
Yeah, so I think my splits were... So I ran 4:23 for the mile portion, so that's like 65, 66 second laps average. And then I was 28 seconds for the combined total of the drinking zone.
Gosh, and wow. So, and the World Championships, did you, tell me if I heard incorrectly, but you were the world champion?
I held the world record for a bit of time before they introduced the World Championships. So I got 5th at the World Champs last year.
Where were they held, Josh?
In Texas, in Austin.
Of course. And, well, therefore, it's not your first Australian Open team, is it?
Yeah,
Josh, let's go on to some other records. You're the current Australian record holder for the 25,000 metres and also the 30,000 metres.
Yep.
How did those records play out for you?
Well, I guess if anything shows you what kind of mental animal or kind of crazy person that I am, then they're probably it. 75 laps around the track was just such a mental grind. I had to run a certain pace through 20k to break the Tasmanian record for that. So I just made sure I dipped under that, and then that last 10k was so much pain. But I managed to kind of sneak in under all of the records on the day, and came home with a couple of national records. It's not a commonly run event, that's for sure, but my name's in the record book now alongside some really great names, that's for sure.
Who are the names that you're alongside? You mean for that event, or obviously you displace them, or you mean others for the other records?
Just around the other events, the Australian records are obviously amazing, so to be in that book, even though it's probably a slightly softer one, is it's a pretty good achievement for me.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I mean, 75 laps, what splits were you holding sort of for each 400, Josh?
About 77 seconds, I think, from memory.
Yep, so 77, 67 or 77?
77. It was about 312 per K.
Yeah.
Yeah,
so just bowling around. By yourself, or did you have support runners?
I had pacemakers for the first 11K, but the last 19K was solo.
Oh, mate, well, that's terrific. As you say, you're in the record books, and the record books. So, Josh, let's do a performance round. So I'm going to throw some rapid-fire questions at you. This is your interval session for the day. Are you ready?
Yep.
Training session you most dislike?
Oh, probably fast lactic track reps, I'd say. Stuff that I don't have to do too much of these days.
I thought you were going to say 25,000, 30,000 metre Australian records on the track. Training session you most love?
I'd probably say a power hour. It's alternating 1 minute on, 30 seconds of floating 40 times through for an hour.
Wow, solid. Favourite pre-race meal, Josh? What fueled you before the PB and the Australian selection run?
Light breakfast, just a couple of bits of toast and a banana before a morning race, I'd say.
How long before the start, Josh, would you ingest that?
Depends on the start of the race. This race was at midday, so I was able to have a pretty hefty breakfast at about 8 o'clock, so probably 4 hours out. But normally I'd have something lighter, 2 hours out.
So 2 hours out. And bedtime, morning time in peak training like you're in at the moment, leading into the World Championships, what time are you getting to bed and getting up?
It's probably gone out a little bit lately because I haven't worked so much. Probably currently going to bed about 11, which is a bit later than usual, up at about 8:30, which is also probably a bit later than usual.
Yeah, be getting some good sleep.
Yep.
Who's the athlete, Josh, that you most admire and why?
You got to admire Usain Bolt. The guy just gets it done year after year, and he's a showman.
And have you watched the I Am Bolt documentary? I presume so.
I have.
Yeah, it's terrific, isn't it? And as you say, he just gets it done, even when the chips are down, right? Toughest competitor you've ever raced against and why?
There are so many at different levels of talent, different distances. One doesn't stand out, I don't think.
Is there one race, though, where you had a real derby with someone in particular in the recent, say, last year?
This is a long time ago, but I used to have a lot of battles with a guy called Alex Spinks when I was in Tasmania. He doesn't run anymore, but we had some absolutely ferocious sprint finishes.
So, Alex, if you're listening in, there you go. He's not running anymore. Maybe you'll make a comeback now, Josh. Mate, is there a mantra that you use when you race? Something that's a bit of a self-talk play that you have running through your head?
Yeah, I'd say I just like to focus on a couple of key cues. So, staying relaxed is often one of them, and then trying to hang on to whatever pack I'm trying to sit on is another one. But a mantra that I use for training is, the most important thing is to get it done.
Yeah, just get it done. Beautiful. Mate, best recovery tip?
Just rest. Rest and sleep. They're my main ones. I keep it fairly simple, but, that works for me.
There's a good bit of marketing there, Josh. Just rest.
Yeah.
Mate, what's the hardest session you've ever done? In all your years of running, what's the hardest session you've ever done?
There'd be probably two here. In terms of absolutely being just stuffed at the time, I remember a session of sand dunes that I did on an Athletics Tasmania camp. I think we did 10 reps and they were about a minute long, and that was just intense pain. But in terms of the marathon type stuff, I've actually done 2 hours at pretty much marathon pace before, so that was very, very hard. 2
hours at marathon pace, so yeah, it's solid. In the sand dunes, were you the one pushing the pace, or were you being pulled along by someone else?
No, I was getting pulled along. My technique is a little bit different. I'm more of a rhythm kind of guy, and on surfaces that I don't get much give back, so sand, grass, etc., I'm not that good, so yeah, I was getting pulled along that day.
I want to come back to that. I've just made a note, Josh, to return to the rhythm guy point there. What's the funniest thing you've ever seen while out training?
Oh, jeez, I've seen some funny things. Probably when training for beer miles, I'd see myself and a couple of mates just out on the trails downing a couple of drinks. People watching would probably think that's pretty funny.
And anything during a race, funny moment during a race, you're happy to share?
Oh, geez. There have been many. Nothing kind of sticks out at this point, sorry.
That's all right. I recently caught up with Charlotte Purdue, who shared that there was a guy running in her 2:30 group in, I think it might have been Berlin, Josh, and he was urinating in a bottle as he ran because he didn't want to stop. So that was quite funny. Josh, what's the silliest thing you've done in managing an injury?
I haven't had many, but probably just trying to run through things that I probably shouldn't have.
Any examples?
Actually, yeah, I'll give you one that's just popped into my mind. Last year after the Lonnie 10, so Launceston 10's coming up in a couple of weeks, I went out and had a few beers with some mates, and I went a fair bit too hard, and I woke up the next morning and I'd busted my ankle up pretty bad, and I kind of tried to deny that it was bad to everyone because I had Gold Coast coming up in a few weeks, and yeah, the next week was pretty painful, but I got out the first 3 days and I could only average 6-minute Ks. So yeah, that was a bit of pain, but I guess ankles getting a bit of blood flow is probably not the worst thing for them. But yeah, that was probably one story that I shouldn't have done.
What had you done to hurt your ankle?
Don't know, sorry.
Next question.
Yeah.
Josh, you mentioned running at 6-minute K pace there. It actually tweaks my memory there, Josh. In one of the blogs that you wrote after your Berlin 2016 marathon, you actually noted that it was your first time, I guess, getting the elite VIP treatment on a big international marathon, and you noted that you were surprised at just how steady the elite guys, the Kenyans, for example, were going out and running. You know, you referenced they ran for 20 minutes at 6-minute K pace, and that surprised you. What surprised you about that?
Oh, just the fact that, you know, as a fairly elite runner, I know how slow 6-minute Ks feels to jog, even as a warm-up. And, you know, even my warm-ups are usually 5 minutes at the slowest, and then potentially, you know, as quick as 4 minutes if I'm feeling good. But, you know, this whole big group of African guys were just going out and they were absolutely just plodding along, and, you know, they get out to the start line and they're off into the distance. So obviously works for them.
Yeah, isn't it fascinating? I just love that adage that, you know, amateur runners make the mistake of, you know, not running their speed sessions fast enough and running their recoveries too fast. It's that, but where's that balance? It's you know, it's never-ending quest, isn't it?
Yeah.
Josh, you mentioned something that just really was of interest, that you feel like you're more of a rhythm runner.
Yeah.
And then you mentioned that, you know, the sand dune work, you know, wasn't necessarily in your comfort zone, your sweet spot. What do you mean by that, though, a rhythm runner?
So I think I've got a pretty high vertical movement compared to a lot of runners. So on surfaces like road and track, that's fine because I get that kind of give off the surface, whereas on surfaces such as grass, I kind of sink in and I don't get that return. So I kind of fatigue a little bit easier and I'm not as efficient. So, you know, I'm not very good at cross country, whereas a lot of marathoners are, but it's not the hills of the cross country that are the thing, it's the grass. You know, if I'm running hills on the road, like I'm quite a good hill runner, but yeah, it's just the surface that kind of doesn't give me that return, I suppose.
And you think that's just your preferred movement pattern? You haven't, you know, consciously tried to manipulate your technique to produce that, right?
Yeah, it's just how I've ran. And, you know, when I have done cross countries the last few years, once I've been aware of it, I have tried to kind of, you know, increase the cadence and do a few things like that to help me out. And it's worked, but still not to the extent of some of the competitors that I'd normally beat out on the roads.
And your cadence, I mean, what might that be sitting at, Josh? Your top speed or your marathon speed?
At marathon pace, my cadence is pretty close to 180 strides a minute. So I think maybe 178, whereas in, say, a 5K PB race, I'd be up close to 190. So, yeah, around that mark. But when I'm out jogging, as I said, I'm a bit more of a bouncier guy. I tend to sit around 165 when I'm going out for a jog.
Yeah. I mean, you mentioned 178, and previously in this interview you mentioned Steve Monaghetti, and I know the first marathon, Josh, I did the Gold Coast Airport Marathon. I think it was 2009. I had no idea what I was doing, very underdone.
Yep.
I just heard that 3 hours was good, so I thought I'd try for that. And I ran behind Steve, who was the balloon man, the pace setter for 3 hours, and I just counted his strides, his cadence, pretty much the whole way until I fell off the back of him, and he was bang on 178 at the 3 hour pace. So there you go, mate. You're in good company with that cadence. So, mate, tell me, what's on your bucket list, both inside sport and outside sport?
On my bucket list, well, until a few weeks ago, I would have said to make a World Championships team. So, been able to tick that off. I'd say still on the bucket list would be to try and make a Commonwealth Games or an Olympics for sure. And then I still want to run some really good times from 5K, 10K, half marathon. That's on my bucket list. But I've got a bit of the ultra bug. I haven't done any yet, but I see myself being a pretty competitive ultra runner at some point. So a couple of those ultra marathons that I've watched the last couple of years have just started to take my eye a little bit.
Which races in particular?
Well, I really enjoyed the Wings for Life run, watching that last year. And then I know a couple of my mates did the Comrades run in South Africa on the weekend. So they're probably two that I've looked at. And then also just being someone that's really interested in PBs, the 100K distance is probably something that, I might tackle at some point as well.
Yeah, brilliant. You'll have to go back, Josh, and if you haven't yet done so, have a listen to Dean Canazis share around his journey. I'm sure you've come across some of the ultra-marathon man's work before.
Yeah, definitely.
Incredible, isn't it, hey? So, mate, all the best with that. I'll cheer you on from the sidelines. Although, after speaking with Dean on the show, I did, and reading his latest book, The Road to Sparta, I think something did tweak in me, Josh, where I thought I'll have to do a 100K at some point in my running life. But
yeah, I'm the same. Yeah, definitely.
You're the same, but I won't be at your pace. That's the difference. Josh, through everything you've learnt through your career to date, your own expertise as your own coach and also an exercise scientist, what would be, if you could boil down all the advice that you could give to people listening in who are wanting to pursue their best performance, what would be the one bit of advice that Josh Harris would give?
Well, I'd go back to that saying that the most important thing is to get it done. So, you don't stress too much on the day-to-day, if you didn't have a bad run or if you didn't feel so good. But in saying that, I would stress that you do have to be very, very kind of gradual in your build-up. So, you don't want to go from just running a couple of times a week and then to an elite training load. You've got to be really smart in how you structure your training. And so that's why it's good to have a coach or someone that knows what they're doing, so you can gradually increase that, because injuries happen, and they seem to happen to people when they do stuff that's a little bit outside their comfort zone.
Yeah, great advice, Josh. Mate, a fun question in bringing this interview into a close. If you could have dinner with three people, Josh Harris, living or past, who'd be at your dinner table, mate, and why?
This is probably not going to be an exciting answer, but I am a pretty simple person. Being a Tasmanian, a lot of your friends tend to move to the big smoke, so Melbourne, Sydney, Brisbane, etc. What I would do is I would have three of my best mates from probably 3 or 4 years ago. We used to have some good times. So James, Darcy and Patrick, I'd get those three guys around and I'd have dinner and a few drinks with those guys, I'd say. That'd be a very entertaining night.
So James, Darcy and Patrick, if you're listening in, you've got to make that happen, boys. And for overseas listeners, Big Smoke is Tasmanian for city.
Yeah.
Great stuff. Mate, you've got a bit coming up. Obviously the World Championships. I believe we're going to be seeing you run here at the Gold Coast Airport Marathon weekend coming up in just a few weeks.
Yep, I've got the half marathon on the Gold Coast, and I've also got the Launceston 10 next weekend. So they're my two lead-in races, and then I'll head off overseas.
And what are you wanting to run in the 10 and a half, just practically? Have you got a target time in mind, Josh?
Yeah, assuming training goes well and I've got the benefits that I should have from my training, then I'd like to run PBs for both distances if everything kind of falls into place out on course. So sub 30 for the 10, definitely. I've done it on the track, but not on the roads yet. So I'd like to have a breakthrough and run that 29:30 to 30 minutes, somewhere around there. And then for the half, if everything went well, I'd love to break 65. But, based on my experience, there's not often a group ticking along at 65 flat pace. So we'll just have to monitor it on the day and see who's about.
Well, mate, as you know, Gold Coast flat, nice, cool, calm conditions. We'll be cheering you on, mate. So that's exciting. Looking forward to seeing you up here.
Yeah, cool.
Josh, this episode will go live the week leading into the Gold Coast Airport Marathon. So obviously we'll be seeing you up here on the Gold Coast. You're running the half, chasing that sub 65. But as an experienced marathoner and now an Australian Open representative, is there any practical marathon tips you'd give to first timers or people that are looking to run their best marathons?
Yeah, I think going out too fast is just the devil. You know, if you're a first timer, there's so much in just kind of feeling comfortable early. If you get to halfway and you're a little bit too slow, you can always pick it up. But if you go the other way around, then it's a very painful road home. So, and I've always been someone that says, I should be strong enough to negative split a marathon if I'm having a good day, and I managed to do that in my last one. So, it's possible, and I'd just conserve a little bit early because, the minute or two you lose, you could lose 20 or more on the other side of it.
I'm just smiling to myself here, Josh, because at the top of the show you mentioned, through the early part of the show, running in Berlin with the elite female winner coming down the finish chute. I recall on the Gold Coast here running through the halfway mark with the female winner going through and going, this is terrific, but then going painfully backwards for the second half. So, mate, pacing a marathon, hey? We could talk for another hour on that.
Definitely.
Mate, how can listeners follow your journey, Josh, going into the World Champs and obviously these next two races? Where can we find you on social?
Yep, so I'm _Josh Harris on Twitter and Instagram. And then I'm pretty big on Strava, so I think it's not as easy to find people on Strava, but you might be able to put my Strava link in your notes or something, or if you just search Josh Harris, then you'll probably find me out of one of however many Josh Harrises there are on Strava if you want to follow my training.
Well, mate, we'll certainly tag that up in the show notes, so listeners, do jump over and follow Josh on Strava. It's a great insight into the work that Josh is doing, which I think is incredibly insightful. And mate, if you could issue listeners of the show with one challenge, a physical challenge, Josh, for the week, Josh Harris's, what's the physical challenge going to be?
I would just suggest get out for a longer run than you have the week before. So build up your long run. I went out and did 39 Ks in 2 hours 40. You certainly don't have to do that, but do a couple more K than what you've done the last few weeks for your long run this week.
Brilliant, mate. Very practical and very easy to tick that one off. If you're listening, let us know. Tag Josh and myself in, and we'd like to see what you're up to. So, Josh Harris, mate, you are a young runner on the rise, and certainly I just want to say thanks for your time today. And I know the listeners will really appreciate your sharings as well. And on behalf of the listeners, mate, we wish you all the very best for the upcoming World Champs and beyond. For the Com Games aspirations you've got and further than that.
Thanks so much. It's been a great time.
So there you have it, listeners. Another great episode due to the great sharings of the guests. And this week, none other than Mr. Josh Harris. So if you enjoyed today's episode, please let Josh and myself know. You can jump over, find us on social. Our handles will be in the show notes, so you can jump over to pogophysio.com.au, and there you'll find all the social media handles that you need. Likewise, if you take on the physical performance challenge for the week, as Josh laid down, then be sure to also let us know how you go with that and tag us in on social media. If you'd like to get this show into your device each and every week, be sure to simply hit subscribe from within your app, and that'll automatically bring these to you. A big thanks, as always, to the two very good folk who make this show possible, our audio engineer, Mr. Daryl Misson, and also the show's VA, Susan Wilkin. Guys, a request. If you know someone that could benefit from the sharings of Josh on this week's episode, a marathoner, debut marathoner, or long-term marathoner, be sure to share the episode with them. It's simple these days. You can simply click the bottom of your phone and copy the URL and put it into an SMS or an email, whatever it is that you want to send. It can be done so easily. So that'd be really great, and spreading the word around, the love around, makes a massive difference. So that'd be terrific, guys and girls. If you are into your running, and I suspect that if you've listened today, then you probably are somehow into the sport of running, then you can pick up a copy of my Running and Jogging Amazon bestseller, You Can Run Pain-Free, now on audiobooks and iBooks. It's also available on Amazon and through POGO Amazon ships internationally, and Pogo Physio can ship the paperback, which is 330 plus pages, through Australia. The book outlines a 5-step methodology, which, as the title says, if you implement, will help you run without injury. Now, there's always going to be the overzealousness that we all succumb to in training, where we can push too hard, too fast, too soon, too much volume, whatever it may be. So injuries can and will still happen, but implementing the 5 steps as outlined in You Can Run Pain-Free will certainly help to mitigate some of the chances of injury kicking in. Coming up next week on the Physical Performance Show, I catch up with the bronze medalist from the 2016 Olympic Games triathlon, Mr. Henry Schoeman. Henry hails from South Africa, and I caught up with Henry at the Super League Triathlon Series on Hamilton Island earlier in the year, and we caught this interview a bit later through the year. But Henry's a great guy. He's very quiet and unassuming. But one of the things I most admire about Henry, other than his Olympic bronze medal, is he is a beautiful technician. So I comment, as you'll hear in next week's episode, quite a few times that Henry's swim stroke, running technique, his form across the board is more or less spotless or flawless. So you're going to really enjoy Henry sharing around the junior years, his first teams that he made, his first ITU race, how he's had to work hard on the bike leg because of his size. He's one of the smaller guys on the circuit, right through to life post Rio as an Olympic medalist, and his goals for the future. He throws out there that he would like to run sub 29 minutes off the bike for 10K, which is what he believes it will take to be up at the pointy end of things come the 2020 Tokyo Olympic Games. So guys, that's next week on the Physical Performance Show. Mr. Henry Schoeman, Olympic medalist from Rio. Until then, keep pursuing your physical best performance. I'm Brad Beer, and this has been the Physical Performance Show.